In this lesson for BobCAD-CAM, we're going to show you how to assign a geometry to your machine for the simulation purposes in the multi-axis portion of the software. So you can see here that I have a full machine being represented in simulation with a part on it. And we can even go as far as, if I hit this button here, housing, this one also has a housing associated with it. So you can get really detailed in how much of your machine you actually create and associated to it for simulation. And what I mean by that is when I hit play, you can see here all the different axes will move together to create those toolpaths in simulation. So you can actually turn this one transparent off as well. So some different nice way to be able to visualize it. Plus, it also gives you the ability, if you have all this on here, to set collision checks. So that way you can tell if the spindle is going to hit the part or this and that and so forth. It allows you extra checking in the simulation. It can become a really nice way to dry run your part before you get it out to the machine and reduce crashes or instances out of the machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and close this simulation down. Now I'm going to flip over to, this part will be fine for now. We're going to go into a whole other window when we set up our machine. But what we have to do is you actually have to acquire the files of the different parts of your machine or create them. Unfortunately, we don't have them to supply. So what we'll do is I have some in a folder for the machine we're going to create. And the one we're going to create it for is, if I right-click Milling Tools, go to Default, Current Settings, and we're going to set up 5-axis BobCAD mill that we created the basis of in an earlier video. So under Machine Definition, you can see we've actually created the basis of that machine, set all the travels, which can be used for simulation, but now we're going to give it geometry. So when that part simulates with that machine chosen, we'll actually see the machine moving. All right, so you have to have parts to put to it, like I said. Now these have to be STL files. Now STL file, anything you draw in BobCAD can be saved as an STL file, or you can acquire it as an STL file and load it in, or even as any other file type, bring it into BobCAD and resave it as an STL. For instance, I have a folder, if I go to File and Open, on my desktop called Machine Part Files. And if I switch down to the STL file type, you'll see all the different ones that I have for this machine. Now each one you're going to assign to a different area of the machine for different movement has to be its own file, as well as it has to be orientated properly. So for instance, I'm going to come in here and open up Machine Base, just the main base of the machine. You see this is a 5-axis Haas VF2 machine base file. I'm going to open that. And when it loads in, you can see it's just the base of the machine. Now for our purposes, I'm going to change the color of it by selecting it, right-clicking, Attributes and Color. And we'll just make it a little bit darker so we can see it. So you can see that represents the base. Now notice how it's represented to my 0 of my screen. You want to orientate the parts of the machine in reference to 0 as they would be in reference to the machine or virtual machine 0 in BobCAD. For this machine, let's go back to this one so I can show it to you in simulation. Just a second to open it. Okay, so let's turn off the toolpath, the part, the stock, and the tool. Now, like when we were building the original setup for the machine, I'm going to go over to my axis controls, right-click on one of these, and set all to 0. So you can see how it brings the face of that spindle right down to the top of the platter. Now that's how you want to reference all your parts to that 0 when you set them and save them out, because when you associate them, it needs to know where it's at. So that 0 point is how far the base needs to be away from 0, or the trunnion away from 0, or the rotary platter, or the y-axis base. When everything's sitting at 0, you can see there where it's referenced. So the center of the table in the center of the spindle as well. So everything's set up to that 0. So for our drawing purposes, if we go back to this file here, the grid 0 is that 0. So you can see how everything is lined up to that the same way. So all your different part files, I'm going to open a couple more here just to show you. Let's go down to STL file again, and let's do y-axis base. Let's take a look at that one. So as I roll it around, now STL files are usually this white pale color. When you resave, if you change the color and resave them, it'll go back to this color. Don't worry about that. STLs are non-modifiable, so make sure it's right before you save it. because otherwise you're going to go back to the original file it was before, an STL file. But you can see this is just a block that represents the base of the machine. I mean, we can even go as far as having, let's get down to STL, the way covers, the machine base bolts. So we saw the machine base was the first thing we opened. This is the bolts for the machine base. So that way they can be represented as a different color if I wanted to. So you can see there's the bolts, and they're still in position reference to that 0. Now if I was to merge this file into the other one, you would see they would be sitting right up on here on these spots. So again, everything's lined up in reference to 0 as it would be when it came together. Just to show you that, I'm going to select these files here, copy them, go back to this one, do an edit and paste, and you can see how it brought those in right at that position. Now, can you have all this in the same file? Yeah. You could put those together in the same file and save them out and load it in one time. Now, and the only problem with that is that all of the pieces will be the same color. If you're okay with that, that's fine. You don't have to save all these little details as separate files. But what you will notice on the one that I have, we're going to set up, I have a lot of stuff as separate files in here. I have the A-axis base saddle bolts, B-axis face, the machine base bolts table, so forth, all the way down to buttons for the controller, and an additional cat head that we're going to put on it for BobCAD. So a lot of different things here we're going to do to this one. So let's go ahead and get started and get setting up this machine. So I'm just going to close down some of these STL files here. Okay. So what I would like to do before I even get started with that is copy those files into that folder, that MockSim folder. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's close this down. Just minimize BobCAD for a moment. And I'm actually going to move that onto the screen here so you can see it. So we're going to take all the files in this folder, which I'm going to open up here. I'm just going to copy them all. I even got the posts for this machine stored in here. And I'm going to right click and copy them. And where we're going to go is into our C drive, BobCAD-CAM data, 25, machine simulation. And we're going to find the machine we're going to modify. It's the 5-axis BobCAD mill. Now all you can see that's in here so far is the XML file, which handles the layout of the machine and the travel distances. So I'm going to right click and paste all those files that I just copied into here. And that's where we want to store them, and that's where we want to go to grab them when we associate them to the file. We want them to be inside the 5-axis or whatever machine folder you're working on, inside the machine simulation folder, inside the 25. All right, so let's bring the 25 back up, and let's start building our machine. I'm just going to do this on a blank screen here. So we're going to right-click Building Tools. We're going to go to Default, Current Settings. We're going to go to Machine Parameters and choose the one we want to assign geometry to, which is the 5-axis BobCAD mill. And then you're going to come down to Machine Definition. And like I said, you can see here is the current layout that we did in the earlier video of just a basic setup of the machine and the travel distances. We don't have to go through any of that again. It's already set up. We've already got collision detection set down at the bottom. And then we'll look at that once we get the files on here. So let's start putting some files into it. So the first thing we want to do is the machine base and the machine bolts. So we're going to right click on the main thing. We don't want to associate it to any of this. We want to associate it to the base. And we're going to add a geometry. The geometry we're going to pick is going to be from that folder in the 25. And we're going to look for the machine base right there. And when we open it, it assigns it in. Now, if I don't want to know what this is, I come over here, click on it, and click in this box here, and we're just going to call this a machine base. Make sure I spell that right there. All right, so that's set. So you can see here's the file it's calling, and here's the color. If you want to change the color of it, just click on that button, and you can change the color of what that machine base is set as. So now we need to add the machine base bolts. So we're going to click on the main name again, which is the base is tied to, and add another geometry to it. We're going to find those base bolts and open. You see how it adds in another geometry here. We'll click that one, and we'll come here to the name, and we'll make this machine bolts. And we'll pick a color for them. Now they don't have to be in any specific order. They're all going to be shown at the same level. So they can be out of order like that. It does not matter. The next thing is the machine closure. This is the casing around the entire machine that the doors and everything would slide on, the controller rests on. So we're going to add that in here. So we're going to add another geometry. And I'm going to slide down for this one. And what we're going to pick is machine closure. Now for this one though, instead of just calling it machine closure, I'm going to use the letters MH underscore. And I'm going to put closure. Now what this is by putting that MH underscore, there's a button in simulation that anything that's tied to that prefix will allow you to turn it on and off in the simulation. Anything that's not, like the machine base and bolts, will always show as long as we have the machine option shows. And we'll see that as we go a little farther. And let's make the color of this like, let's just do light gray for now. Alright, so the next thing in here is we're going to do is the controller. And we're going to put it assigned to this too. So we're going to add another geometry. We're going to look for the controller right there. And this one as well is going to be an MH. Did I do that twice? Let's see. We got the base, the machine closure, and the base bolts. I assigned that to the wrong one. Let's go back here and change that. Let's do machine, base, bolts. See, be careful you don't get out of place like I did there. This is the closure, you can see here. So I want this one to be MH, and it's lowercase, closure. And then this one's going to be the controller. MH underscore controller. I'll take that P out of there. So I'll hit enter, lock that one in. So I've done the base bolts, the closure, and the controller. Two more to add to the main part of this, and this is the main machine. We don't want any of these attached to any of the moving parts. That's why we're attaching them to the actual BobCAD mill base. We're going to add one more geometry in here, and this one's going to be the buttons. I've actually got separate buttons for the controller, and those are called the black buttons. Now when you see these, you'll think, oh, that's kind of cool to have the detail. Just remember, that's another STL file I've got to create and got to place every one of those buttons in the right orientation from that 0 to have them line up properly. So we're going to click on that one there. We're going to do MH underscore buttons, and we'll pick a color black. All right. One last one we're going to add to this base part, and this is a cat head. This is just a little detail we put on there for visual purposes. So we're just going to choose the cat head. Click on that geometry. Let's give it a name, MH underscore cat head. And we'll pick, we'll leave that color for this one's fine. So we've set all this geometry so far for this. Now we're going to come in and start looking at the Y. Now the Y, we're going to right click on it and add a geometry to this one. Now the first Y we're going to add is the Y base, which is right here. Now the Y base, if I click on it, I don't want it to be able to be turned off, so I'm just going to say this is the Y axis base. We'll pick a color for it and OK it. Now we're going to go back to the Y. We're going to add another geometry for this, and we're going to do the Y-axis ways, the covers for them right here. And we'll click on that geometry. Take your time. Try not to get too confused in here. Now you want to make sure that you don't name the same thing twice because it can get confused when trying to call two files in a simulation. You might run into instances with that. So make sure you take your time, make sure the names are correct as you go through here. And again, that's not one we're going to turn off as well. All right, so now that we've done that one, we're ready to come down to our X. We're going to right click on it and add a geometry. And this would be the X-axis base. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to call this X-axis base. We'll make this a gray color as well. We'll right click on the X again, add another geometry, and we're going to do the X-axis ways. And rename this one. So you see, this can take a little bit of time to set up, but if you set it up, you really get a really nice, good, detailed simulation out of your machine. So, and software. So we've done the X, now we're on to the A. So the first thing we're going to do is the A base. Actually, we're going to tie that to the X as well. And you'll see why in just a moment. It's not moving. It's staying attached to here. So we're going to look for the A-axis base. And we're going to open that one up. Click on that. And we'll name this one A-axis base. And we'll just leave the color for now. We can come back and change it. Now we're going to move down to the mill table that also gets tied to this. So we're looking for machine table right there. Oop, not that one. See, I want to be careful. I want to click on it before I rename it and make sure that it has the right name of the geometry here before you rename it to what it is. So this is going to be the machine table. And now we're ready to do the A-axis saddle. So now we'll click on the A-axis geometry. We're looking for the A-axis saddle. We're going to click on that one and rename this one A-axis saddle. We'll come back to A and add another one because I have one that's the saddle bolts. And I will change the color of that one a little bit different to black. All right, so now we're on to the C-axis. We're going to add a geometry for this, and it's just that faceplate, little platter. It's actually the B-axis faceplate that's going to be used for this. So we're going to open that, click on geometry, and we're going to call this the C-axis faceplate. And we'll just make that a different color as well. So that's set. Now, we've done everything we need to down to the workpiece for geometry. Now we need to go back, which what's attached to the machine base is the Z, and attach things to the Z, like the spindle, the head, and things like that. So let's add a geometry to the Z. The first one's going to be the spindle face. So we're going to look for the Z-axis spindle face right there. And we'll open that one up. And we'll give this a name. And we'll call this Z-axis spindle face. And we'll just leave the color. Go back to the Z, add another one. We're actually going to add 3 geometries to this. We're going to do the spindle assembly. And we're going to add our final one to the Z. And it's going to be the head body. Z-axis head body. All right, so all of those have been created. So if we go from the top and look at it down, you got your your main base of your machine with the head, the buttons, the controller, the closure, the base bolts, and the base. Those are all separate STL files. Now, if you don't want to worry about differences in colors between them all, like I said, you can have all that in one file and just associate it once. Then we go into the Y, which we have our Y-axis ways base and A-axis base, and then the machine table, and then the, do I have those in the right spot? Let's see here. No, I renamed that the wrong thing right there. That should be the X. Where'd my X go off to? So you should have your A base machine table. This name got changed here to X. Just like that. My fault. Sorry about that. So that's why it's always good to look back through there so you make sure you got it right. See, there's my Y-axis ways, base. There's my X-axis travel that sets. Machine table, A base is on the X with the X base and ways, and then the A and the C and the Z. All right, so if we've got this set up, we should be able to OK this and store it in the software. So if I go back to this one here now, and I simply go into Part, Current Settings, Machine Parameters, and choose that machine, we should have that full machine when we simulate it now. Color-wise, I'm not sure what we'll get, but we'll see what happens when it opens up. It's coming in just a second. There it is. Now let's turn the part off, so make sure that's not an issue. So you can see there's my whole machine, all the different pieces to it, right down to the bolts there. You can see the saddle bolts in there that I have separated. Now you might ask what all the enclosure and stuff like that was. Well, that's this button right here, which is Machine Housing Show Hide. If you hit the down arrow, let's say we want to show it. So here's the machine housing. So there you can see all the black buttons that we assign. As well, there's the cat head, separate file. So if I want to go back in and change the color of that machine housing, I'm going to come into Milling Tools, Default, Current Settings, make sure I have that machine chosen, Definition, find the closure. Let's make it like a white. And I like to go back into Part and just switch off of it and back on. Just so it takes the change. And now when I go to simulation, we should have a different color housing. So here it's loaded up. Let's turn on our housing. There you can see it's a different color. So you can get some real detail inside of here and everything and set it up. And then when I hit play, everything should still move just as it was. So setting up the machine files to have geometry with them is a very nice thing to do if you have the time. Again, these are something that you'll have to acquire, whether it's through drawing them or finding them online. You can find a lot online if you just do a little bit of digging. So you're going to choose your machine type, go into Definition, just right-click on it, and associate some geometry to it. The last thing I want to look at real quick is the collision. So if you click this and add this to your main machine by just right-clicking and adding a collision check, you can see in here, you could choose every piece that I want to check, and I want to check it against the stock in the tool. Make sure they hit or don't hit. And if they do, they'll show in red. So you can add things back and forth in here as needed. Choose one out of the list and transfer it over, and it'll make sure it won't hit, and so forth. This concludes this lesson.